And welcome back. Gun violence and intimate partner violence are often viewed as separate problems requiring different responses. But neighborhoods impacted by high rates of gun violence also have the highest levels of reported domestic violence incidents. The RISE Project, which stands for Reimagining Intimacy Through Social Engagement, works to ensure community-based anti-violence efforts have more tools as well as resources to prevent and respond to the intersection of intimate partner and gun violence. The project supports healthy relationship norms and the prevention of domestic violence at the community level through public education campaigns, community programming, and efforts focused on community healing. Joining me to share a little bit more about the work they do is the program manager at the RISE Project, Nathalie Arzu, and we thank you, Nathalie, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good. And as we talk about this, and I start off in the intro talking about gun violence and intimate partner violence, they're separate problems, but they do require different responses. Share a little bit with me about that.
A lot of things that's different with when we talk about the RISE Project is that we transform the way we respond to intimate partner violence. A lot of times across New York City, when we respond is usually after a fatality or someone's now incarcerated, right? And also understanding and addressing the intersectionality is that a lot of time gun homicides stem from an intimate partner violence situation, whether it's a gun in a home, which increases the likelihood of fatality by 500%, or maybe a family member or a friend trying to protect their loved one using a firearm to protect them. A lot of times when we talking about we want to be intentional about ending gun violence, we have to also be talking about IPV related gun violence as well.
Yeah. And when we talk about intimate partner violence, how is that defined?
Intimate partner violence is whether it's abuse or harm that occurs between intimate partners, right? Think of it as a lot of times we just use the word domestic violence. Domestic violence is kind of just an umbrella term, and under that is family violence and intimate partner violence. Intimate partners can be whether you dated before and you no longer are dating, but dated prior to, are in a relationship now, are married, talked for a little while. It's defined how if you have relations, it doesn't require you to be sexually involved, just be intimate with someone in a particular capacity.
Yeah. And so your work really is trying to create some norms here. And so talk about what some of the challenges that you're facing and what you'd like to see happen.
We all come from different communities. A lot of times we're learning about relationships from our friends and family. And a lot of times we're not getting the healthy information, right? So a lot of times we just keep promoting and spreading false narratives of what a healthy relationship looks like, right? And our job at RISE is to change that, right? We want to be able to be in spaces to actually see what norms people, when we talk about healthy relationships, what are they actually thinking? And when we take that information, we also give them the right information, right? Because it's a two-way street when we talk about education at RISE. A lot of times we do a lot of campaigns in the community. We give out palm cards where we talk about a healthy relationship that other people have said, whether it's communication and what that looks like, right? When we're talking about when we're angry, how do we respond? When we're talking about expressing ourselves, what does that look like? Especially coming from community where we don't express our feelings as much. We don't communicate well. And a lot of times the same communication skills you use with your family and friends, sometimes that also is the same communication you use with your partner.
And so when we talk about partner violence and intimate partner violence, obviously a lot of conversations need to be had. What can we do in terms of helping people navigate through this very, for lack of a better saying, intimate situation that sometimes goes bad?
One of the things that arises is that a lot of times when we talk about intimate partner violence, a lot of people just think about the physical, right? There's so much harm that can be caused, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's verbal, sexual, technological. There are so many harms that can be caused. And one of the things we say is that everyone has the capacity to cause harm. So one of the things is that we want to give family and friends the knowledge and the resource so they're able to talk to their loved ones, because the individual causing harm in their relationship is usually a family friend or a loved one. And we care about them. And we care about them. We don't want to wait until they're in a situation, whether they're being incarcerated or fatality happening due to IPV, before we get involved, right? We want to want residents, community residents, to feel comfortable to go to a friend and say, hey, I care about you. I've seen this has been going on. How can I support you to create those changes so that down the line, something doesn't happen due to the intimate partner violence that's occurring?
Yeah. And so domestic violence is definitely a topic that we talk about. We highlight that here on the show, and we do different things during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. What can we tell people about really speaking out and really allowing themselves an opportunity to receive some help?
A lot of times when we talk about intimate partner violence, the person experiencing or causing harm is usually going to their network, which is usually family, friends, people in their community. So a lot of the work we do is actually building awareness on that. Even though we interact with someone who may not be experiencing it, they may be getting the knowledge so that they can pass it on to somebody else. Also understanding that it's a difficult thing. A lot of times intimate partner violence, domestic violence is something that wasn't talked about outside of the home. So it's kind of an uncomfortable talk that people feel like, hey, this is not something we talk about. How do we actually have these conversations? And that's the things that we give out. We give out tools, bystander training, intervention, just so that people feel comfortable. How do I have this conversation with someone so they don't get defensive? How do I have a conversation with them so they know that I'm coming to that person with the knowledge and the resources to support them to create that change?
Yeah, and creating change is important. Obviously, a healthy environment is, the key. You want to be able to be in a healthy environment, and particularly with someone that you're, intimate with, or living with, or in relationship with. What have you learned coming out of COVID? Because in this COVID situation, a lot of people were forced to stay home, and sometimes in some very unhealthy and toxic situations.
That's definitely when we say toxic, even when we're talking about whether it's youth groups or community groups, we say toxic is just another way of saying unhealthy, right? When people are in home where they're unable to communicate, usually, even during the pandemic, we have seen that people still weren't calling the hotline, right? Even places that they would need to walk into were kind of closed. But they were able to connect to family members and friends. And how can family members and friends be that support system for them, right? Whether it's creating a service plan, a safety plan for them, right? Also, someone, when they're experiencing harm, we understand they're also not willing to call the police. We know when we come from Black and Brown communities, when we're calling the police, even for something as IPV related, we know that because of the color of our skin and the circumstances we live in, it can escalate. It can be something totally different. And sometimes people still care about the loved one that is causing them harm. They don't want them arrested. They also just want them to change or want them just to take a walk so that they don't continue to be harmed in that instant.
Mm. And so, the work that you're doing right now, share a little bit about the services, because if somebody's out there saying, listen, what kind of services do you provide? I may know somebody that's actually being affected. What do you do?
Outside of the trainings that we provide to those that are doing the work in the same community that we are, we also are working with those that are causing and experiencing harm. So for someone experiencing harm, we help navigate those services. We know that sometimes you can call a hotline and it becomes like it goes into a black hole, we say. Sometimes we don't know what happens to that individual. Do they even reach out? Do they even get the services that they need? So one of the things that we do is help navigate that system while also giving warm handoffs. So we try to create connections with organizations that are providing the services. So we can say, hey, I know you told your story so many times. I'm going to connect you with somebody that can is going to help you so that they can kind of not go through the extra steps. And it also depends on what services they need, whether it's housing, right? Whether it's order of protection, whether it's a transfer for that housing. Maybe it depends on what they need, and what they need is what we try to get all the information so that we're able to provide it for them. For someone causing harm, that's one of the main things that we do, is that we work with them one-on-one. If they're not ready for one-on-one services, we do groups, which is groups of people who may have caused harm or are continuing to cause harm, to actually create change and hold themselves accountable for their actions. A lot of times when we talk about IPV and domestic violence, we're able to get the person experiencing harm the services that they need. But then again, we don't stop the cycle of violence, because then that person causing harm is going to go into another relationship and continue to cause harm. So one thing at Rise is that we try to create that form of accountability for them to change their behaviors. And that can look like a group-based setting, or that can look like individual services. And a lot of times your family members and friends know the person causing harm. And it's okay to say, hey, I know this service that can help identify why it is it that you're causing harm. It can be from trauma from the past, right? It can be something that you learn as a young person and assume this is the way I communicate. This is how I show I care about somebody, right? Even growing up when we're young, When a boy hits a girl, oh, it's because you're showing them that you like them. But as you get older, that's something that can get stuck in someone's head, and an assumption of like, hey, I'm causing harm, but it's to show you how I love you. And that can also be one of the things that needs to be worked out in one-on-one sessions with a coordinator at Rise.
Yeah, I want to go back for a minute because when we talk about this, it's very important. You're talking about something that's very specific in terms of the person that's causing harm, or better yet, it can be technically known as the abuser or the offender. Many times we have conversations that really center around victims, but your work really entails dealing with also those who are, offenders and those who cause harm. What can you tell us about some of the work that you've done there, and what are some of the results that are actually coming out of that?
We don't use those particular terms. One of the things we want to do is we want people to come as their whole selves and give them a chance to change. When we use words like offenders and perpetrators, those things kind of label and they're court words. So one of the things we say is like someone who's causing harm, right? And the lot of ways that we interact is we can get a referral from a crisis management system, which is an anti-violence programs that are throughout New York City. Or we can even interact with someone in our sessions or our healing groups when someone can say something and it's like, hey, let me pull you aside. Can I talk to you for a second? Right? A lot of our work can look like individual work where it's like sessions, right? We don't talk about therapy. It's really a chance for self-reflection, right? Practicing accountability. What does that look like, right? Also understanding why the behaviors you're doing, right? Sometimes we're not given space, and even when we talk about therapy, it's also so taboo, is that we just want to talk. We're going to talk to you like we're going to talk to our friends, our family members, because we care about you, because you're part of the community. We don't believe in throwing people out, and that's one of the things that we have seen, that people tend to, because we're non-mandated, you're not forced to work with us. So a lot of people may do a session with us and say, hey, I want to come back. I didn't realize I have all these things I need to work through. I didn't know why I was doing these particular things until I had a chance to talk. We're not here to diagnose. We're not here to make assumptions about you. We're not here to judge you. We're here for you to actually work through what it is that's making you actually have those behaviors against your partner, right? Because a lot of times we throw the word anger management, but a lot of times, like, you're not angry at everybody else. You're just angry at one person, right? And it's, why is it that one person?
Yeah. And I know the work that you also do involves crisis response. When people are in a crisis, you are there and present. Give us a little bit about the crisis response.
Due to our capacity, we don't intervene in intimate partner violence situations. Usually after, if there is a fatality or someone is incarcerated, that's when we will respond, right? A lot of times it's, whether it's like, because it's something like that, especially if we talk about fatality in the community from IPV, that does shake up the community, right? Because these are people that you've seen. People, sometimes people say, hey, I should have said something. And in that space, we provide healing, right? We provide support, letting someone know, hey, if something like this was to happen, or you see something like in terms of like people arguing or a couple that may need support, how can they, whether step in like as a friend, hey, I know about this program, or even reaching out to Rise, hey, Rise, there's I feel like that we should have groups, right? Because we don't want to intentionally target somebody, right? We want to be able to provide groups so people can actually come in and actually have those conversations. Because when we do have conversations as a group, people do a lot of self-reflecting, like, hey, do I do that? Am I intentionally causing harm and not being aware I'm causing harm? Because once you identify you're causing harm and how someone may feel, that's the time that people start taking that accountability. And what does that look like? Because a lot of times the word sorry is not enough.
Right. I want to go back to this. You talk about not being mandated, which is very important because that means that a court doesn't have to say you have to do this. So the people that you're actually meeting are people who actually want to do this. And so give us a little bit more and share with us a little bit about how open people are in having these conversations and having these dialogues. We know when you have to do it and you're mandated, of course you're going to do it. But when it's not, which is in your case, you're seeing some great results.
Yeah, so it's different, right? Because you would assume when we're talking about IPV and domestic violence, people don't like to talk about these things. These things make people cringe. People like to keep this in-house. So even having a conversation, we're not coming to you as, hey, I know you did this. This is what the court says you did, right? Because a lot of times some people may be court involved by the time they get to us, right? We allow them the space for them to speak to us and what it is that led them to where they are right now, right? What could have they done better, right? And in those spaces, people feel like they feel relieved, right? We're not forcing you to talk. We're not forcing you to like identify yourself as a perpetrator or anything like that. You're a human being, right? Human beings make mistakes, right? Human beings do things. And how do we hold ourselves accountable so that moving forward, we don't continue to cause harm? So we have seen a lot of people come back and say, hey, I want to continue, even though I'm not mandated. I want to be able to continue to work these issues out so that I don't continue to harm people in my life. And so one of the things about our organizations is that even working alongside, we have to work alongside systems to say, hey, we're not mandated, but also just giving out the information to people. Hey, maybe this is a program that you may want to get involved in, right? It's not mandated, but it could be something that you may be interested in. And that's how you get people to, even once they walk through the door at Rise, we do the rest. We actually just have a conversation. We treat you like a friend. We don't because at the end of the day, when it's mandated, it's like, hey, this is an appointment, you got to get here, we have to talk about what all these things that happen, but we don't jump into that. We're asking you how you are as a person before we get into all the stuff that can be trauma, right? Can be things that led from the past as to why they make the decisions that they do.
Yeah. And I think that's, from that approach, I think a lot of people will definitely feel like the guard is down. I can have this conversation. It's open. And before we end out, I just want to give you an opportunity to share about, some of the success stories you've had.
We still do confidentiality. So we have a lot of success where a lot of individuals that have worked with us also become peer leaders with us, right? They've also been able to say, hey, I've learned things at Rise and I've been able to tell my friends or feel comfortable to tell my friends, yo, I care about you and I want you to get the help and support that you need. Or even if it's not someone causing harm on a consistent basis, it could be one incident and it's like, hey, maybe you should communicate better. Or maybe if you're angry, you can always reach out to me, right? These are things that we can't quantify how great Rise is until you hear the experiences of people that come back and said, hey, I've learned this and I've been able to share it and give it out to the community. We can't reach everyone in the community because we're so small a team. But once we also know that that one-on-one interaction that we have, once that person feels like, hey, I know what I've done wrong and I know that I had to work on changing behavior, because when we talk about causing harm, it becomes a habit, and when it becomes a habit, it becomes very hard to break. So one of the things that Rise is that we continue to do the work, even though you may not see it in numbers, but you can see it in experience and testimonials of people who come back and say, hey, I want to help support Rise in any way I can, because without Rise, I probably would have still gone into the system, right? I wouldn't have realized what was wrong because people were considering punishment instead of trying to identify why was it that I was causing this particular harm.
Yeah, great work that you're doing, and want to definitely thank you for coming and sharing with us. Now, for more people who want to get connected, let them know.
Yes, so you can definitely reach us on Instagram, which is the Rise Project NYC. We definitely put up content. We also go on live. We talk about anything that connects to our communities as well. And if you ever want to speak to us directly, you can hit us up at 646-709-3623. You could definitely text or call that number.
Well, Nathalie, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. The great work that you're doing and really helping people through some really tough and the word of the day is intimate situations. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, we will continue. We've got more on the Social Justice Forums. Don't go anywhere. We'll return right after this.